Welcome to the Interstice podcast, episode 55. Crawling towards 100, we will make it there. I want to send out a big thanks, first off, to all the people who support me on Patreon. That's how the podcast continues. And over at davetrippin, how more sweet content gets made. Really appreciate you guys for that, and everybody else tuning in. Today we have a really interesting, storied guest with us. Only able to come in through the mic, but that's okay. This is a podcast after all. It is Adam Valois, and he is an old friend. We've known each other. I've talked about my other friend Drew, but Adam and I have known each other, I think, for nearly just as long, since we were basically junior high or probably elementary, like since we were about 10 years old, something like that. And Adam has seen himself traveling around the world, working with some fascinating companies, doing all sorts of crazy things. It sort of defies description to say something specifically now that would like create an umbrella of everything that he's done. Currently are you in Georgia right now, or are you in Berlin right now, Adam?
Well, thanks for that introduction. I'm actually just back in Berlin yesterday.
Okay, cool. So where I wanted to start, where it was like I was just getting a little bit of prep from you there before. Let's jump into, you are working with the Syrian refugee crisis, and I was hoping just for like some of us who have basically, like, I can hear those words and be like, I remember this. I remember the Syrian refugee crisis, but I mean, it's sort of at a glance. Like, can you refresh us on what happened there and your role in it?
Yeah, I mean, so it's certainly still going on, and it's one of those situations that I think since around 2015 it really started to ramp up. But it's kind of almost like a living organism in the sense that it's continually changing all the time. It's sometimes the crisis gets worse. Sometimes it sort of has a lull where it stays the same for a while, and then sometimes it gets worse again. It's completely unpredictable. The actors involved are always changing, always shifting, and so the environment is always super complex.
What was its inception? What was the inception? What sparked the original conflict there?
It's basically a political issue with the government. So I mean,
okay.
Unfortunately, it was so there was before Syria there was like this Arab Spring, which was in that region, sort of an armed struggle against different authoritarian regimes. There was one in Egypt and one in Iraq, and this kind of thing has been sort of springing up as people have been sort of, let's say, moving towards more democratic governments, or at least wanting more democratic governments, and which is understandable. More rights, more freedom, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, Syria was one of the cases where that sort of insurgence failed, or at least is still in the process of failing, where the government actually cracked down and, well, over a long period of conflict, has actually started to gain ground on insurgents, and it's gone the other way in this case.
I see. And so how did you get involved with that? Like, how does somebody find themselves over there trying to assist?
It was really one of those situations where, right after I was graduating from my master's, I sort of, was at this sort of place where I had absolutely no money. I went into debt over my head, and I was just, as you do, looking for work on the internet, and there just happened to be a role that opened up in the Syria response for somebody that had a background in IT, and I was always sort of before that. So I worked before in Zimbabwe as a consultant for the UN for a while, and since that experience, I've always wanted to work for an international organization.
I see.
Coming from Canada, as you know, especially the west coast of Canada, you feel like you're sort of in a bubble trapped at the end of the world, I suppose, similar to Australia, where you have the Pacific Ocean on one side, you have the United States on the other side, and the Atlantic Ocean on the other side. You feel sort of like you're you're existing in the world, but not really existing in the world. You're sort of separate from the world. You're sort of existing apart. And I just had this draw to wanting to be part of what was going on in the world and do what I could with my skills to improve things as much as I could.
In the Shire, yes, cut off.
In the Shire, exactly.
Yeah, well, okay, that's cool. I mean, I can't say that I totally feel what you felt, because that was obviously like a big reason of me, even at the very least, going over to Vancouver, where I was like, wow, like, I mean, if you think you're in a bubble in Vancouver, just be on the island, and, you know, then you're Vancouver Island, that is, for those who don't know about it. Beautiful place, but very much isolated, its own sort of like microculture there. So there's like two things I could have used in this intro. It would have been useful. What was your master's in, and when did you work for the UN?
So I worked in the UN immediately after I got my bachelor's degree, because it's one of those things, just like you were mentioning in your videos, that you need a bachelor's to sort of be considered in certain kinds of roles. So like teaching English overseas, you need a bachelor's, and working as a consultant in this case, you need a bachelor's because it was contracted through the government of Canada. And once you have a government involved, there's always these like strict rules and regulations. You know, you could be the best person for the job, but if you don't have a specific tick of the box, you're automatically disqualified. And it's something I really railed against in my youth, but then sort of acquiesced and started to spend my time ticking boxes. But yeah, so that's right. So yes, in 2013 I went over to Zimbabwe. Incidentally, that was actually during the time that Mugabe was still in control of the country, and it was just after they experienced like one of the worst like hyperinflations in recorded history.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so like there was some serious issues there, like food shortage and food insecurity, and you know, just lack of money available because your currency is basically worthless to pay government to just be government, essentially. So there was like a lack of access to basic things. They had an AIDS epidemic, tuberculosis epidemic, a couple other epidemics, and so the UNDP was working on supplying medicine to the government so that they could actually do something and help people. But I mean, it involved a really complex supply chain of getting medicine from India or Norway on a barge, on a boat, all the way to South Africa, and then clearing it across the border into Zimbabwe, being a landlocked country, and all of the sort of logistics and bureaucracy in the way to just get medicine there before it expires, worthless basically.
So you were stationed to receive the medicine in Zimbabwe?
No, so I was in the operations department. So I was basically working on creating a more efficient mechanism for tracking and distributing the medicine and getting it there with less errors and that kind of thing.
Okay, I see what you're saying. And where was that? Were you in Zimbabwe for that?
Yeah, I was in Harare.
Okay.
The capital.
Well, I mean, man, there's so many things to go through there. First, like, without you don't have to go into too much detail, but maybe you want to. What was your master's in? You said it was in some sort of IT-related detail?
No, that would have been smart. So after that experience in Zimbabwe, I got really interested in logistics, and so I took it in global supply chain management. So it's kind of like a master's of science. So it's like operations science, you could say.
But okay, very cool. I want to definitely, though, I got to jump into like. So, what did you say the capital city of Zimbabwe is?
Harare.
Harare. And what is it like? I've never been to Africa. I know nothing of the cities there. Like, it would be interesting to hear a first-hand account of something like that.
Well, I give you a really interesting. So I lived with another Canadian. So we were like flat sharing there, and so every morning we got picked up by a driver who brought us to the UN compound, and we did our work there, and we got driven back. I remember one day after about 6 months or so. We were sitting in the grass waiting for the driver because, you know, as it is in these kind of places, you know, people are rarely on time. And so we were just discussing and we were looking up at the sky and, you know, it's like a perfect day, right? Like 28 degrees, sunny with some clouds, so the sun wasn't directly on you. There was a slight breeze, so you feel comfortable, but you're still warm. Perfect. Just imagine perfection, and that's what this was. And we were both sitting there, and we're sitting like, you know what? And we're both from Canada, so we're both thinking like, when was the last time we haven't had a perfect day? We're like thinking back over those last 6 months, and it's like never. Every day has been perfect, and this is what we reflected on. So. Just imagine living in a place where the weather is always nice. I mean, it's a hard thing to imagine. There is not so there is a sort of a rainy season and a sort of a dry season.
Yeah.
But the rain is like clockwork. When it's the rainy season, it'll come at like 5 p.m. and it'll end at 7 p.m. So you can set your watch to it. It'll rain hard, but it's easy to avoid. You just get home by a certain time and then you wait it out, and it never catches you unaware. So that's something to describe. I suppose the other thing is when you're in this latitude, you have these really dramatically different. It's the same as Mexico. You have these dramatically different climate zones. So Harare is in the mountains, and so it's quite high up. And so you have this sort of alpine spring air. I mean, imagine Africa, but then when you go down into the sort of savanna, then you sort of see the Africa that you sort of see in the National Geographic and stuff like that, and you have like all of the giraffes and the elephants and like the big trees and the sort of squelching heat and all that kind of stuff. So it just depends where you are. It's very different.
I see. And so so if I'm following your train of reasoning there and what you're trying to relate, it was that as a result of being in the mountains as well, it was cooler.
Yeah, so it's like this. It's like permanent, almost spring kind of like hot spring kind of weather. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what were the people like there? I mean, I know humans are humans, but obviously, like cultural differences are everywhere and make the experience of traveling that much different.
Yeah. So this was actually one of the things I needed to do to adjust, which being sort of type A North American person, sort of always on and always, trying to get things done, being on time and being sort of super anal. People there are very relaxed and very easygoing, and it took me a while to adapt. But once I did, I started to realize that I sort of liked who I was more being there than I did being back home. And I think that's one of the things about travel that makes it really interesting is that other people have an effect on you, and you change and you adapt, and that's I mean that's what's really interesting is learning almost different points of view that were never possible. Like, you're familiar with the concept of like mimetic learning or desire, I suppose.
That only to be familiar with having heard that word before, but you have to explain it for me.
What's the idea that I mean, human beings they sort of assume that they desire certain things, certain that could be luxury goods or even just ways of being, right? Like you could desire to go to an ashram and like meditate or something like that, and you think that those desires are coming from you, but they're actually not. They're modeled on what you observe from others. You could see a fashion influencer on Instagram, and then you could desire a gold watch or something like that. And you think you desire that gold watch, but you don't. You desire to be like this person you see, and they have a gold watch, and so you want one. And most of the idea is that most of our desires are modeled by other people, and I think that's what makes traveling so special. Is that you start to change your models. Right, so you change your desires, and you start to change what you want, and I think you start to change how you think and who you are. The more you're exposed to this, and it could be for better or for worse. It's just depending on what your values are, right? But so there's this idea of desiring a slower life, desiring more time with friends, desiring more time relaxing, desiring more time hanging out, and it's sort of improved by the weather, in the sense that, like, do you imagine every evening you have this perfect sunset, and you have like this warm like air, and you have this like nice setting for like they call it braai, but it's like a barbecue. I have this culture where at 4 p.m. people get together and they just hang out, have some drinks, have a charcoal fire, have a barbecue, and cook the meat for like 3 hours or whatever, and then just kill time with people, just hanging out, shooting the breeze, and it's super 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 nice to have that, to be surrounded by people that know how to appreciate it, to have that time to do it. Like for example, in this job, I guess as part of this response, on Fridays everybody went home at 12, so we worked longer hours Monday to Thursday, but then on Friday we had this extra time, and you spend it barbecuing. It's not a bad way to go.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That is a fantastic concept, isn't it? It's a sort of I think it's like another kind of mindfulness. This like, where if I desire something, where is it really originating from? Is it originating from me? Is it like you described? It's more actually the environment that you're in that is dictating to you what you desire. Am I angry, or is it just something like, oh, am I angry about this, or is it really related to that? I've never heard it positioned in that way, though. It's always been in the context of, when I think of mindfulness, it relates more to your emotional states than it does to, although I suppose an emotional state is to desire something, but I've never heard it specifically for that. And I like that idea a lot. It's that sort of, when you don't realize, it's the whole like, the fish can't tell what the ocean is because it's in it, that kind of thing. It's I've said this, I guess, a little bit of like reverse culture shock. So you notice that when you go abroad, there you are living in Zimbabwe. But I think, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, maybe this would be another, like, here's the way that we can fractal off of this, is that something that I found so cool was actually the reverse culture shock, where you go back and where there's all these things that you took kind of like, this is just the way that humans are, you kind of see them now as an actually like an affected behavior, as opposed to just like the natural way of the world. Like, what's your experience? Because you've obviously, I know you're abroad, you come back. What's your experience as it relates to culture shock in the reverse?
Oh, you mean like coming back to Canada?
Yeah. Like, what was your feeling of that? You were like, oh, I didn't know we ate so much bacon, or whatever it was. Like something like that. Just that noticing where the culture is when you came back to Canada.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough question. That's a really tough question, because it's also one of these things that every time I come back to Canada, I come back with different eyes, and so it affects me differently.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that the first time I came back was probably the most it impacted me, because it was my first time experiencing reverse culture shock, or even coming to grips with the idea that it's a real thing, right? Because I always had this idea that I would come back to Canada, and I would just sort of fit right back in again, and
right.
This is my home, this is where I come from, and there would be no culture shock. So the first time I experienced it, so I'd been sort of backpacking in Mexico and Guatemala for like more than half a year, and I came back, and actually the first place I came back was I think I met Drew and Cam in Richmond.
Okay.
And
cool.
what I remember about Richmond was the wide roads. This might seem a bit weird, but how wide the roads, because in Mexico, even the biggest highway that crosses the country is only 2 lanes, right? So it's very narrow. There's no like shoulders or any extra pavement, because that costs money, right? And I was in the main freeway in Richmond, and I had to cross the road, and I think it was 6 lanes. I can't remember exactly, but it looked so far away to get to the other side. Like I had a panic attack, because the little green man showed up, and I was just like, can I make it across that vast expanse of tarmac before? And I remember I walked across the road, and I was halfway through, and I was like, really, like, my heart was racing, and I was really panicking. So I just didn't think I could make it to the other side in time, and I was scared. So I started running like an idiot, and that was, like, just, this wasn't a culture shock per se, but like maybe an opulence shock or something. Like, this unnecessary amount of distance that was there.
Hey man, it can.
Yeah.
It's. I was going to say it's the little things, but I suppose in this case it's a big thing. It's a distance or whatever. But it could be that it can be that subtle, right? It can be the distance that you walked across the street, something like that. Well, there you go, right? It's stuff that you totally take for granted is just the way the world is, but then you're realizing that it's all different. It is absolutely distinct. The way that, I mean, maybe even one of the examples might be like how that little dude is depicted on the walk or not walk sign. You know, like in Japan, it's like a dude with like a little hat on. In Canada, he looks slightly different, and I'm sure now in Berlin, different again. But it's like, it really is that culture is entwined in everything, like absolutely everything. I guess that was my takeaway, is I thought that it was not culture, it's just the way the world was, but then you realize everything is culture. The distance across the street, the way the dude looks on the crosswalk sign, the way that people are talking, the way that people move, the way that everything, the way that the process of life occurs is so different. And then you realize, maybe kind of like this might relate back to what you're saying about, you suddenly become aware of that, oh, well, if that's something that is affected, that is something that is people are taking on, and it doesn't just have to be that way, maybe it's as well another way that we're able to see how things could be different, where you're like, oh, well, if this is all just, a suit that we put on every day, why couldn't we put on a different suit? Because I've now seen that there's this great variety around the world to choose from. And that's with, like, you've done much more international travel and actually spent significant time in places than I have. So you're there, you're appreciating this new, did you use that word? Was it mimetic?
Yeah.
Mimetic. Okay, that's really cool. So you're there. Then you move on from the UN to end up working in, forgive me, the name of the crisis again, so I don't like put my foot in my mouth.
Syrian refugee crisis.
Syrian refugee crisis. And so you're there. Your master's was in like distribution chains, international distribution chains. Where do you end up in Syria, and what exactly are you doing when you're there? How to, like, even if you want to tell, like, what's it like to arrive in a place that's experiencing a conflict like that?
Yeah. So, that's yeah. It's actually kind of weird. So you first you sort of ease into it like a frog. That is slowly, the water's slowly heating up, and you're boiling to death, but you don't really know it.
Yeah.
It's not like you jump in. So you arrive in Jordan, which is sort of it's an interesting country because it's sort of like a safe space surrounded by conflict zones. And you go through like your initial training. So I went from Jordan to Nairobi, Kenya.
Okay.
And there I went through something called heat training, which is I can't remember what it stands for anymore. But basically, it's like training for what it's like to enter a conflict zone. It was like 1 week long in like working with like some specialists and also the Kenyan army. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that it's very much like basic training in the army, because they intentionally deprive you of sleep, and this is intentional to make you sort of feel like it's real in a sense, because once you lose sleep, your mind starts to play tricks on you, and things that you know aren't real start to sort of phase into things that you think are real. Yeah. And it's kind of like you're in a dream state where you're whatever your mind sees becomes real, and so the scenarios that they put you through start to like emotionally really mess you up. So it was so they're trying to train you to simulate what it's like to be kidnapped, or what it's like to be tortured even, and what it's like to be what else, like let's say you go through a checkpoint, for example, and normally it's a government official. They check to make sure that your documents are in order, you don't have any guns in your trunk or whatever. But then sometimes it could be a rebel army that is pulling the checkpoint. You don't know that, and then they take you out of the vehicle and bring you to their camp and hold you for ransom or something like that. So they're like shouting, like shooting into the air and threatening you and all that kind of stuff. So it's what was special about it was that it prepares you so that you understand the decision that you're making to go into the conflict zone before you actually do. So you have an appreciation for the decision that you're making. Because after all, it is your decision to go there. And when you're working with people, and this goes back to that sort of desire. When you work with people that are used to working this way, they'll say, "Hey, we're going to go to this conflict zone. Get your plane ticket. Let's go. It's going to be interesting and stuff like that." And they have this like sort of positive spin because they've done it so many times. They're desensitized to it.
Yeah.
And if that's your only exposure, you're going to think, "Hey, maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe they don't think so, right?" But after going through this, my boss was just like, "All right, we're going to go to Syria. We're going to do a tour and I'm going to do my job, which was IT related infrastructure to do an assessment, that kind of thing." But I realized like this is what I'm actually doing. I mean, this could happen to me. What we just went through with this training, I really had to think about it. Like emotionally, it had an impact, and that was important to make the right decision.
Can you say like any of the what was some of the specific training? You said they were stimulating like being kidnapped and stuff, and like what?
Yeah, so it gradually becomes much more intense as it goes on. So like they'll have this situation. So like we'll be learning about something like disarming a firearm, or like how to like look for mines or like whatever, or how to put out a fire, like all these different things. And then and they teach you like how to bandage a wound, how to treat a gunshot wound. So like big difference between getting shot in the lung versus being shot in the gut. There's like things you can do, things you can't do. You have to make decisions about like if there's somebody shooting at you and you're in a car, you have to be able to assess which angle they're shooting at you from, and which way you get out of the car, which way you run to safety, what you can use for cover, what you can't use for cover, and like the angle of fire and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And anyway, so you'd be sitting in a classroom, and then all of a sudden there'll be like bombs going off outside, and somebody like dressed in a soldier's uniform will run in and start shouting, and like grabbing people and stuff like that, and saying like, like you have to come out, and you have to decide like, do you come out, do you not come out, like is it safe, is it not safe? You have to make these kind of decisions. And once you go out into the courtyard, there's all this smoke, and you can't really see. And there are like lots of people lying on the ground with different kinds of wounds, right? Like one person maybe is missing their arm, one person has got gunshot wounds. You have to decide, like, okay, look, who can we help that's actually going to live, and who's not going to live, and who's going to die? And you have to make those decisions and help the right people in the right situations. So like that's the kind of training, because the idea is like, okay, so let's say you're going with a group of people into this conflict zone. You want to feel confident that like if you get shot, the person sitting beside you knows enough about how to take care of you, right? That kind of thing. So
yeah.
You have that sort of, yeah.
Please continue. So you were in one of those scenarios. You're in the classroom. Suddenly a guy comes in, starts yelling. You then move to the courtyard. There's people there, and you're making decisions on on who it is that you would like administer like first aid to, that kind of thing. When do you know when the exercise is over? I mean, it sounds like The Game with Michael Douglas. You never know when you're playing the game or if it's real, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point, right? Like it feels like your mind is in this weird torn place where like you're like, this is just a game, but then your emotions are running away with you. You're like, I have to save the people and whatever, or and you feel like it's real, but your mind tells you it's not, and so you're always in this weird place. But like certain things like that are really important is like, for example, if somebody's bleeding, you want to stop the bleeding. Like they're very simple decisions. But like if somebody's, for example, if they're shot in the chest cavity, you can block that off actually with like some tape and a credit card, and you can create this artificial airway where you tape 3 sides, and then there's one side left, so that when they breathe in, it opens like a flap, and when they breathe out, it closes, so it allows a vacuum to form, that kind of thing.
I see.
So you can do something about it really, really easily. Another thing that's super effective is like a tourniquet, which is like this thing where it's like a strap that you put above the wound. So like, let's say you have an artery rupture in your leg, which will kill you like in minutes. If you're able to apply this tourniquet and put a lot of pressure, it's got like a ratcheting system above the wound, you cut off the bleeding, and then that person survives. So the idea is, A, can you do something to actually solve the problem? B, can you do it quickly? Because you want to do the thing that's most quick. So if you applying a tourniquet takes seconds, and if you can save a person's life in seconds, do that first, right?
Right. Okay.
You want to have one person who sort of, if you got like 5 or 6 of you, you want to have one person take over that triage where they're making those quick decisions. So they make the decisions, and then you take on, okay, I'm going to help carry the bodies to the bodies that can be recovered to a safe space and work on them. And then you have other people that are just bandaging and other people that are just doing that. So you want to like almost in the blink of an eye create like a hierarchy and turn yourself into a system in a way. You don't want to have a bunch of people just running around trying to be the leader. That's not going to help, right? So there's an element of psychology. There's an element of making the right decisions. There's an element of knowing what to do, right? Like knowing to apply a tourniquet, for example. So and knowing how to carry somebody in the right way, for example. So there's a lot of things that you need to understand, but then you have to practice them, because if you don't practice them, you won't remember.
Absolutely. And so I'm curious, you're doing this training. How long did the training go on for? And did you was there graduation day? Like, did you know there was a set time, or was like an indeterminate time that they would simply say, when you're done, you're done. We'll tell you when you're done. Or how did you know that you were finished training? And then what happened after that? Were you shipped out to somewhere else? What's the next chapter?
Yeah. So, I mean, it did have there was a predefined time. So I think it was like a week. Okay. But while you're doing it, I felt like I stopped being aware of days that were passing after about 3 days, because in the middle of the night, you'd have to run these different kinds of drills. So like you'd be on radio one night, you wouldn't be allowed to sleep, and you had to go to this room that's full of mosquitoes and bright lights, and you have to like man the radio and just document all the traffic that's coming through, and it's really it's just an excuse to make it so you don't sleep. Or some nights, everybody gets woken up in the middle of the night because like there's some sort of crisis going on. So you stop sleeping, and everything sort of blends together. So yeah, it was a week, but it felt certainly a lot more. And at a certain point, I kind of stopped taking like track of the time, because not only was I not so aware of it, but also the exercises kept getting more intense. And so I was much more focused on what I needed to do than when it was going to be over. I mean, it was another kind of like situation like that, where at the back of your mind, you're like, this will be over soon, and that's what kind of helps keep you motivated and keep you sane.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. I mean, that's it takes very little time for sleep to erode your sense of continuity. One thing leading to the next. So I can see how that would very quickly suddenly become, it's like it's all one day, it's all one huge day. So you could be sleeping and there would just be like an alarm go off, or somebody come into where you're sleeping and be like, get up, we got to do stuff. How did that go down?
Yeah, exactly. But it's much more like you hear an explosion or gunfire, right? And then you sort of get up, and then it becomes, not only are you awake, but then you're immediately thinking through, like, where is it coming from, and what does that signify, and what I'm supposed to do in this situation, and do I take a leadership role and start waking up other people? Do we go to a certain point to muster, or is mustering a bad idea? And like, what was I instructed to do before? I can't remember. Damn it, I can't remember. Like that kind of thing.
So I'm curious then, are these simulated gunshots and simulated, or did they actually like fire a gun or detonate something to create these scenarios?
So the real firearms, but they were sort of blanks. So okay. But they sound like real firearms, and they are real detonations, but they're controlled and sort of in a safe distance and that kind of thing.
Okay, wow. All right, well, I have so many more questions, even just for this training, but to make sure we continue. So you make it through your week, and then what happens? Where do you go? What's next?
Yeah, so I go back to Jordan. I have a debrief with my boss, and then he says, okay, so we're going to go into Syria. We have to go in. So basically, the thing about Syria it was controlled by many different groups of people, and these different groups of people, like the borders of their operations, was always changing. So you had ISIS at the time that were in the southeast, I believe. And you had the Kurds, which were in the northeast of Syria.
Okay.
You had two different, or even three different rebel groups that had sort of splintered off. I mean, they all wanted to gain independence for Syria, but they were sort of loosely aligned, sort of loosely not aligned on different parts of the West.
Okay.
And then you had the actual government of Syria. Now, to get across the border, there's two different options. And we as an organization, we're operating in several of the areas. But so to get into the country officially, you had to enter in across. You had to go from a government controlled border point to the city you wanted to go to with no interruption along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an easy border crossing between Jordan and Syria, a road, a highway that connects the capital to the capital, and it takes 3 hours. But that was controlled by a rebel group, so we couldn't take that way. So we had to fly into Lebanon and go across the border there, because the Lebanon border crossing had a freeway that connected to Damascus, which was the goal. But if you wanted to go to
Damascus,
that was one of the goals.
Okay.
So one of our operations was there, and then the other in the northeast, we had to go through Iraq and then cross near Turkey. By boat, and that you had to do unofficially because, well, there was no real government and no real control. So you had to
wild.
You with the Iraqi government, which was actually unofficially part of Kurdistan, which considered part of Iraq to be theirs, and also part of Syria. They gave you a special stamp on the passport, and they recognize that stamp. So you're not technically in the country. You're kind of technically and I don't know what you would call that, like an alien or something like that. But then they respect that stamp when you come back.
Okay.
And that's how you get back into sort of civilization, and then so you're sort of in the wild, let's say, from a border perspective. So the first trip we made into Damascus, and the second trip was to the northeast. And again, because we had offices there, I needed to go to the different offices to perform the same checks.
And what sort of check? Okay, well, I won't even just keep with the I like this sort of granular detail. So you said we went through Lebanon. Is that where you went through?
Yeah. So Beirut. Yeah.
Were you? So what are you in vans? What's the mode of transport to take you into the country? And are you marked as it's not you? So who are you recognized as when you're there? What group are you associated with?
So the group is NRC, and so the Norwegian Refugee Council, and you have to carry your badge because basically the base in Damascus is in constant communication with the government, and they're going to be the ones that say when you get to the border, they're going to radio in and say, okay, this person's coming across. Do they have permission? And they would have already figured that all out beforehand to let you in.
Gotcha. So. Are you recognizable to the conflict groups that are there as oh, these are here for humanitarian aid? Is there something that indicates that?
Once you get into not really when I remember when we went across in unmarked taxis, and we were recognized only at the checkpoints by showing our ID badges. So no, it wasn't like the UN with the big flashy 4x4s and everybody knows who you are when you're going there because of the big blue UN stamp on the side. No, I mean we were roughing it.
Okay, wow. So I mean I feel that obviously adds to the danger because you're just like everybody else. You're just another human soul that's in this place of conflict. So you're going in unmarked taxis. How far is it from the border to the offices that you're going to?
Uh, border was about halfway, I think. So it was about I think it was about 4 hours in total if you count the border crossing. So maybe an hour and a half to the border, an hour and a half from the border, and then maybe an hour at the border.
Okay, so you're traveling for an hour from the border to the office?
Hour and a half, but
Hour
then
and a
also you
half.
have to count the fact that like you have to take a plane at night. You spend the night in Lebanon. The plane takes a long time because it can't fly over Syria or Israel, so it has to like fly
Yeah.
around, and it's really yeah. So the whole thing took like 24 hours or something like that.
Right, right. How does, once you enter the conflict zone, like how is that, must have been a bit of a nail biter from like you're over the border now, you are in the conflict zone getting to that office. Like what was your emotional state? I hope you were better rested than you were in training.
Yeah, it's it's kind of this thing that it's always shifting depending on what you're hearing and what's going on.
Mhm.
Um, so like if everything is smooth and you haven't heard any reports of anything that's happened in the last, let's say, 2 weeks, you feel reasonably secure that you'll get there without too many issues. You go through the checkpoints.
Okay.
Some friendly men with guns, not so friendly, but men with guns, will check everything every time. And the first few times it feels a bit, because they're not like police, right? Like these are guys that have seen combat and they're always on the lookout for combat. So they're seeing you coming in, and their first reaction is like, "Are you a threat?" Right? And
Yeah.
if you're lucky and they're the official people, like they're going to look at you like that. And then once they realize you're not, then they sort of smile and wave you through. But those first few moments before they make that decision
Yeah.
um, feel a bit alarming, let's say, because they have guns and you don't, and that kind of thing, right? Like you're sort of just you're at their
Yeah.
mercy, right? You're literally at their mercy. You have no choice. You can't go forward. You can't go back. You're stuck with whatever they decide.
Right.
Um,
That's I mean, isn't that, like, I was thinking of the trip itself, like once you're past them, but just even that dynamic, to have that dynamic explained is so interesting to me, where you're like, I think that at the worst mercy I've been is usually in like a motor vehicle branch, where you're like, they might not give me the license, like, um, never something so extreme as that. So you get by them, they wave you through. What is it now? You're heading towards the office. What are you feeling in the vehicle at that point? Like, maybe it'll surprise me. Maybe there's more like curiosity and excitement than fear. Like, what's that like when you're closing that home stretch?
well, there's like 4 or 5 checkpoints that you go through. And once
Oh,
you even get into the city, there's checkpoints in between different neighborhoods, different districts. So you're kind of like you're always going through checkpoints. Everywhere you're going through checkpoints. So eventually, it just gets like a little bit tiring, right? But
routine. Yeah.
yeah, routine, but also like just almost annoying because these people have like some people are nice and it's fine, but some people are not nice, and it just depends like what mood the person's in that day, and you just sort of like hopefully, but so once you get into the city, then
Yeah.
you get to your workplace, and everything feels really deceptively normal. You have like
Hmm.
this office environment. Everybody's there to work. They're all, everybody's there 9 to 5. You all got your little laptops and you're going to meetings and all that kind of thing, right? Like, then it starts to feel really, really normal. It's actually in the morning, getting to the office, and in the evening, deciding what to do. That things don't feel normal, but in the office, everything feels pretty normal.
Pretty normal. Okay, so tell me about. All right, cool. I love the progression of this story. We'll definitely have to have you on to a couple podcasts to get through your full history, like, because we're not going to get anywhere near up to what it is that you're doing now, which is very interesting as well. But this is just too good not to go into greater detail with. So you were you like in a compound, like a gated compound that you stayed in? Were you in like the flats of the people? Like, where were you staying when you were in Damascus?
It's interesting you say that. So I'll make another comparison to the UN. So down the road, there is like the biggest kind of hotel compound you can imagine. Like they took this hotel, right, this Best Western or whatever it was, and they completely occupied the entire thing. So it's just UN in, just UN out, and they do all of their work in the hotel. And they turned it into a fortress, right? So like they put like concrete barricades, they put like spikes in the road, they have like armed guards outside of it. Like this is a proper compound. So that's not what we had. we had like this old hotel from like the 60s or something like that. It had like this sort of charm from that era, like kind of falling apart a little bit. And we weren't the only guests. In fact, there were Russian soldiers staying there as well at that time, because they were also involved in this conflict. And so that was a bit weird having breakfast with them in the morning and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it was just like this motley crew of like Russians, different people from different like business organizations, that were coming in to make business with the government and that kind of thing. And then us, we'd have a couple rooms in there as well in this old hotel.
Okay, so you get up, you brush your teeth, you have a shower, you go and have breakfast with the Russian soldiers. And then how are you, is it scheduled that you're like picked up in the morning to be taken? Are you walking on the streets of Damascus during this conflict? How do you get to the office?
Yeah, so basically what we had is so the breakfast in the morning was interesting because it was always this same artist. I think she's Lebanese. Her name is Fayrouz. It's like this Arabic music, and every morning it's Fayrouz. So have you ever seen the movie Groundhog Day, where like every day feels the same? Yeah. So it's like the same breakfast spread, the same buffet, the same Fayrouz playing in the background. In this like with these like old drapes over the windows, like this like musky light coming through. Like it's just this really weird ass experience. You feel like you're lost in time and lost in space, going through the motions of this. So that's the morning. To get to work, same unmarked taxis. So basically we had this contracted taxi service. We call them up. They'd come over, they'd pick us up, and they'd bring us into the office. Maybe it was 30 minutes, maybe it was 45 minutes, couple checkpoints and that kind of thing.
Okay, and then now it's like some of this for me, it's like it might be considered the most important thing, but I've been enjoying, as I say, all the granular detail. So what are you doing in the office?
So in this organization, I would say that 80% or so of the staff are national staff, and in Syria it's probably more like 90%.
Oh, wow.
So part of it is your actual job, but part of it is also like just sort of cultural sensitivity. So like for me, there's like certain cultures that are like, I would say, a small cultural distance between North Americans.
I see.
But some cultures are like a big distance. So like for example, like in Africa, they are Christians mostly, at least in South Africa, not North Africa. So the cultural distance is actually less than here, which is predominantly Muslim. So there's a lot of different things as a man that you have to really be careful of and take really seriously. Because like, there's certain things that are cultural. Like, well, a cultural norm would be after work to go for drinks. Well, they don't drink.
Right. Yeah.
Ways to behave around women is a big thing, right? Like just talking to a woman alone could be about work. It could be about anything. Could be frowned upon. Could be seen as suspicious. Like that. Like your it's just a friendly conversation could be seen as making romantic advances. For example, I mean, I had a run-in with HR at one point because I was too friendly with one, and I got in trouble for it.
Okay, let's wait. Pause. Let's do it. What happened? Let's go into this one. So you, it was a colleague you were working with?
Yeah.
And what happened? What happened? What was the story?
Well, like nothing crazy. I mean, like you have some work colleagues that you like, some work colleagues that you don't like, and some work colleagues that are like good friends that you have like a good conversation with, that you have something in common with, and you just enjoy their company, that kind of thing, right? And,
yeah, for sure.
A few too many times I was on lunch break, and we just have lunch together and share our day, that kind of thing. And it started rumors, and people were saying that it was inappropriate. It made them feel inappropriate. It didn't make them feel inappropriate. It made them feel, I don't know, uncomfortable. Maybe that's the word.
Yeah, sure. I see.
Yeah, so like, but and it doesn't go before HR unless enough people are actually, like one person says, "Hey, I didn't like that," then be like, "Well, suck it up." But like, 5 or 6 people in the office are complaining, then it becomes an issue, and yeah.
Okay, so there's a little bit like this guy's crossed the line here to be so frequently enjoying the company of this lady, even if it only is to have lunch with her.
Right, and here's the thing, right? Like you have, so the organization's Norwegian. Right, and so the idea is you have certain, let's say, work norms, but those work norms are inherited from the Norwegian culture, and they are superimposed on cultural norms that are also work norms for people working in Muslim countries, and those two things superimpose on each other in funny ways.
I bet,
and they things don't really align. Yeah, but they do. Like during Ramadan, for example, you're not supposed to eat during the day. You're supposed to be fasting, right? And, well, as a Westerner, that's just not going to happen, right? So you have to like find ways to eat discreetly and stuff like that, because you don't want to be like having a cheeseburger in front of somebody that's fasting, because then they smell it and that's going to really affect them, right? And that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So and that's what I mean. Like you always have to be aware of everything that you're doing. Everything you're saying is everything that's considered normal in your normal behavior in an office that you've been trained for since you started working is no longer necessarily acceptable. So you just have to you always have to be sort of aware and adapt and sort of be the sort of, let's say, culturally enlightened or appropriate kind of person.
Be water.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yes, let's use Bruce Lee here. Oh man, okay, so that's really interesting. Was that in terms of like office drama in a sort of cultural way? Was that the height of ever what happened, or were there any more serious altercations around there that had nothing to do with the conflict and just sort of like making sure that you were cohesive with the culture that's there?
I think most of it was just like it feels like nothing serious, I would say, but it felt like being a child again, in a way that you have to like relearn the boundaries and the rules, and you have to always be sort of testing and seeing what the response is to see, like, did I just cross a serious boundary or did I just cross a small boundary? And you also have to sort of assert yourself too, right? Because at some point you have the right to be happy, to do good work, to enjoy your time, and that kind of thing. So you have to figure out, where that line is for you. Different people cross it in different ways. Like what's really common for expats in these scenarios is to drink a lot, and they after work they go and they just drink, and it could be because of the stress that they are dealing with from the conflict. It could be just blowing off steam from all of these cultural mishaps happening every day, and then they want to hang out with other people that are like them, see the world like them, and just feel relaxed.
I get that. I get it.
So that's something that people do. I'm not a really big drinker, so that's not something I did. But one thing that I thought was really cool was I had this really great boss. And I can't say that very often in my life. I've had a lot of really bad bosses, but I had this really great boss. And he really put a lot of effort into making people feel included. One thing that was really cool is he had a really multicultural team. It was him and I, and I think about 6 other people from the region.
Okay.
And on weekends, he'd organize these sort of team building things. I mean, they weren't really team building things. They were like, camping trips, hiking trips. And he brought his family along, he brought his colleagues along, and he just tried to make everybody feel like they're part of the same thing, part of the same team. And he really helped us bridge those gaps ourselves and create those learning things where, they learn about our culture, we learn about their culture, and we find certain activities that we can agree on and meet on.
How was hiking in Damascus? What was that like?
Not Damascus. No, that would have been off the table. Because the problem with Damascus is Damascus was like a bubble where like the conflict was like right around the edge of the city.
I see.
Like every day, like mortar rounds exploding and like underground tunnels being collapsed and people being displaced.
Wow.
And the city it's like a bubble of normalcy, at least partial normalcy. But no, this was in Jordan, so we just go to random places in the desert, and you know, so instead of drinking, he wouldn't bring alcohol. Like, you know, he would drink, but only if it was with other expats. But if we were with locals, he wouldn't drink alcohol at all. He'd find some tea and we'd have tea together. He'd make it. He'd find that meeting point where we all agreed on something, and we'd do that. And that was really really effective.
Where's he from? What's like age, background, a little bit more? Sounds like an interesting guy.
He's he's American actually, which
All right.
in itself is actually kind of, to my mind, makes him even extra impressive. Because Americans are actually pretty famous for just imposing themselves on other cultures around the world, as you probably would see in the news.
Sure.
Yeah, he wasn't like that. So he's American. I would say probably early 40s.
Okay, early 40s, American. Any idea what state he was from?
Yeah, maybe not exactly which state. Maine. I want to say Maine, but in the Northeast somewhere there.
Northeast. Okay, interesting. Yeah. People are people, right? It's you got to give them that. Whoever you meet, you're another human being, regardless of whatever other descriptors come along with you. That's so interesting, man. Do you have any particular like a memorable hike that you did, or were they all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sweet.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. One is this place called Wadi Rum, and if you ever get a chance to go there, do you ever see the movie The Martian? With,
yeah, I did. I enjoyed that big time. Yeah, it was good.
They filmed it there.
Oh,
Like,
okay. Okay,
yeah,
that's interesting.
So like this place literally looks like Mars, and you camp there, and it's really beautiful because it's so far away from civilization. Like you have to drive to the end of the road and then take a camel or a 4x4 into the desert for quite some time, and then you get to this Bedouin campsite. So it's like these. It's kind of like glamping in a way, like these sort of they use a lot of like these sort of fancy tents, I suppose, but they're not fancy tents. But compared to North American camping, they're fancy. And it's like really beautiful. Like you're completely away from all civilization in any directions. There's no light pollution, so you see like thousands of stars in the sky at night. It's really really quite nice, and you have like these beautiful sunrises and sunsets there and stuff like that. So really really recommend it as a place to experience. That's otherworldly. There's not so many places that will like blow you away like this place does. But a memorable experience was like we got caught in camping in this windstorm that was so powerful that like it exploded the tent on us.
Oh wow!
Like the actual like tent poles like just collapsed and fell apart. So we ended up sleeping in the car But there was not enough spaces in the car, and so my boss had his big tent with his family, and we didn't really have much options. We wanted to keep camping, so we had to like drive the trucks in front of his tent to like try to block the wind so he could get through the night, kind of thing. So
wow.
it was quite intense. Like this storm was like such that like if you put your arms out and you had like anything that could like a jacket that could cause like a bubble, like it would actually pull you sideways. Yeah, really, really strong.
And only wind. How was the sand? The sand must have been like dangerous, I would imagine, in that kind of situation. Or am I just imagining that?
No, you're not. It depends. I think it depends where the wind is coming from and which direction it's coming from and where it originated. So
okay.
During certain times of the year, you do get some pretty intense sandstorms, right? And you do have to like carry like a handkerchief with you or something to like cover your mouth and like offer some kind of filtration. But this was but you can also get like what we had was just a really powerful dry wind.
Okay. I wanted to stop there for a moment on the point you were making as well about the stars. Because that's something. It's been good that I have friends that I stay in contact with from the island, from Vancouver. I always should say specifically Vancouver Island, where we're from, because when I think back on those nights there, I'm like, am I crazy? Was it actually like that? Because on the island, there's so much less light pollution. I mean, I should say specifically, like, since we were in Mill Bay, this, like, nothing town. But I remember when I was young, camping out on our porch and then looking up and marveling at how many stars there were, and how that's something I saw less and less of as I went to cities, and then I came to Japan. I never saw it the same like that anymore. And so, when I talk to my friends and they're like, no, it really was like that. And then to hear about your experience here, it's a whole different thing, eh? I think unless you get out into these kind of places to do that, you don't realize how much is up there. It's a totally different way of seeing the sky.
I think you're right. I mean, in that way, in terms of, what did you say? You said that, like, as you aged, you moved to different places where there was more light pollution and you never had that again. I would agree with that. Like, seeing it again had such an impact. It probably had been like at least a decade or more since I'd seen it before the last time, even though I grew up with it.
Right. And for me, it is but a dream. I haven't seen anything like that in recent memory. I've been to a few more remote places, but always times a year and stuff where I couldn't get that same experience. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully, I'll get it again this summer when I return back, which will be a lot of fun. So, continuing with your story, you're there in the office, and you were. What was your objective in the office? Like, what was it? What was it you were actually doing there to help people?
Yeah. So I mean, you could call me much more like operations. So
Okay.
it was more my job to help the people that were helping the people, if that makes sense.
I see.
Yeah. So like if you boil it down to like the core business had a couple of pillars, which were the way that people were helped. I mean, one of them was providing housing, like
Okay.
either sustainable long-term housing or
Mm-hmm.
emergency shelters.
Mm-hmm.
So that people had like basic things, like if there's a rainstorm and people don't have shelter and it's cold, they literally die. Like they just die because there's nowhere to go, and like everything's flooded. So like providing emergency shelters, providing emergency first aid, providing enough so that people can sort of survive through the conflict, so that when the conflict's over, they can return back to their homes and then reintegrate. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing is like these long-term conflicts, like 5-10 years long, you take all these children out of school and they lose their access to school. So another pillar is to provide education for these displaced people. So like when they come back, like if you were in grade 1 and you come back after 10 years, hopefully you're not in grade 1 still, right? Like you can sort of advance to like maybe not grade 10, but like maybe grade 8 or something like that, because you've got all those basic skills.
Yeah.
So there's providing education, providing nutrition. So especially for children, for babies, just the right nutrition when food is limited to like 2 or 3 food items, so that they sort of grow up in the right way without any kinds of issues. And then the other one is providing, which is really interesting, which is providing legal support. Like during these crises, like people, when they leave, other people will say, "Oh no, that was my farm all along," for example.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I get that. Sure.
Yeah, people are people, like bastards. And providing the right legal support, so helping people get documentation that proves what they owned is what they owned, and so when they reintegrate, they get back what they actually had before. And that's a really complicated one, because you're doing all kinds of archivals of documents that the government is not even necessarily aware of. You're doing investigations, you're testing people's claims, that kind of thing. Like it's a really big thing. So I think that's everything. There might have been at least one other thing, but those are the main things that are provided. So there's different organizations like MSF, Doctors Without Borders is another really, really big NGO around the world, and they focus sort of specifically on providing emergency medication to people. So it just depends which organization you are, and so you might work in partnership, so that one organization provides some things and you provide other things, and that together creates a full package of support. and so basically what you have is these offices that are nearby, where the refugee camps are. And so the offices are providing, a centralized point where you have all of the working files of all the projects, of all the distributions. So like one of the big things is you get money from donors, and they're called like projects, and you manage those projects so you might have like a project that's got like whatever like $1 million from one of the ECHO, for it's like a UK organization, and they might say we're interested in distributing medicine, so you've got enough for bed nets or something like that. So you got like you can distribute like 10,000 bed nets with that money. So you have a project to distribute those bed nets, to procure the bed nets, to distribute the bed nets, to prove that you've actually distributed them, to prove that people are actually using them, to prove that it actually made an impact on their lives. There's less malaria in the organization. So there's this big arc for all of the all these programs, which is what they're calling them, not projects, but programs. And so that's what these offices are. They're like program management units that are doing all these programs that are related to these pillars that I mentioned earlier. So my job was specifically we were in the data and technology team. So basically we were providing help and support for people to manage the massive amount of data that was being undertaken in these programs. So like tracking distributions, and then also like finding ways to we had this like thing called monitoring and evaluation, which is like to prove using statistics that these programs were effective, and then you have like these dashboards that display the data in interesting ways. So we'd help build those, and then the actual core IT infrastructure, which was like having a safe place to store people's personal information, for example, because if the government got hold of that information, they could really cause harm to these people. So like stuff like that, like IT security, providing VPN connections to get around these different sorts of technical blockades, for example, so that you can like Microsoft might not let you use their products inside of Syria, so you have to find a way to allow these offices to use these products, because otherwise you can't do work, basically.
Man, that is so fascinating. This is I'm absolutely going to have you back on again, because we just need to continue this. But I do feel that was also a great punctuation point for us to end on here. I have never known so much about what it could be like in one of these conflict zones. So thank you so much, very much, for coming on. We'll have you back again. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This is probably did you expect to hear this on the Interstice podcast? We're definitely evolving here. This is so cool. I appreciate your time. Is there anything that you'd want to draw anybody's attention to with like programs that you're working on now, or if people want to help in these kind of situations, what they would look into, Adam?
Yeah, so there's this, I would recommend a book. It's called Effective Altruism. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think that the author is Scottish. Okay. But basically the idea with this book is what he does is he breaks down the effectiveness of how to donate money to different kinds of programs, and like what you donate to, like what effect it actually has in terms of the maximum impact you can make, right? So like you want to make every dollar go as far as possible, and he has a lot of data to support this. And one of his like conclusions that was really surprising to me is that the most effective thing is usually the least sexy thing. And
so
for example,
so true.
Yeah, like so the most effective thing you can donate money to is deworming the population. So like different programs that deworm children, because worms stunt growth, they stunt development, like intellectual development, and there's lots of statistics that show that children that have worms tend to do poorly in school. They don't graduate, they drop out earlier. If you deworm the population, more people graduate, especially women, and they become much more productive members of society, and it has a huge impact economically on these underprivileged sort of areas. And this book sort of makes that clear. So like it's like I would say a great starting point if you wanted to do something and you wanted to feel like it was actually meaningful.
Awesome. Okay, effective altruism. That's a great recommendation at the end there. Thanks, everybody. I said it at the beginning, but if you want to support me, it's at Patreon, Dave Trippin, Patreon. If you want to get a hold of me, if you'd like to be a guest, as Adam was a guest on the podcast, that's at contact@davetrippinjapan.com as well. This will be available on all the different places you would expect to find it. You guys are awesome. Thank you again, Adam. It was great to have you here.
Thanks, Dave. I really, really appreciate this. I mean, since the pandemic started, I've really got into podcasts a lot more as like part of my life. So being on a podcast, a really cool privilege.
Right on, man. Well, thank you again. That's all for now. We'll catch you guys in the next episode.